Series are starting to make a difference to the environment by introducing eco-friendly paper straws to their 200 ml juice cartons. iloveza.com, in collaboration with Series, are starting up a conservation conversation with some industry experts.
Welcome to Conservation Starter. I'm your host Ziyaad Plaatjes. Today on the show we chat to Samir Randera-Rees, who is the manager of the water source areas at WWF South Africa. Placing a brick in the toilet cistern, is it a simple way to save water? Is it a fact or a myth?
That's true. If you think about the volume of a brick, let's say it's a litre. And if you put that brick into the cistern, it's taking up a litre's space in that cistern. And maybe that cistern has 10, 12 litres worth of space. Something crazy to think about is that that cistern is full of drinking water. You can open your cistern and drink the water. And that's kind of crazy that we are flushing good drinking water down the toilet, because that's the most expensive water that we have. We're spending billions of rands every year as a country to treat our water, and then we're literally flushing it down the toilet. But a way to reduce that wastage is you put a brick in there, it takes up a litre less. It means that every time you flush the toilet, you are using a litre less than you would. So, and over the course of a year, I don't know how many times you flush the toilet, but it's probably quite a lot, and that means a lot of litres in the end of it. That's a fact. So South Africa is a water scarce country. We get just about half of the average annual rainfall as most other countries in the world. And when you look at the spread of water across the country, you realize that most of the country is fairly dry. You know, the grasslands, the Karoo, all of these areas are pretty dry areas. And that's why those strategic water source areas are so important, because that is where we get most of our water from. And again, if you look at the availability of our water resources, you realize that 98% of the water that we have available at a high surety of supply, 98% of those resources are already allocated. So it's not like we can find different resources and start to allocate them. And they've estimated that by 2030 there's going to be a 17% shortfall between supply and demand for water. So that means that we are going to have a 17% deficit. We're not going to be able to supply everyone with water, and that's why we need to be very smart about how we use our water resources. I think that water efficiency is part of water conservation, but I think that water efficiency is something that maybe you can do as an individual in your home, or what you can do as a business owner in your factory or in your offices. You know, it's a way that you can start to use water more efficiently. But water conservation, I think, is more holistic. You know, that's where you look at the system as a whole and you say, how can we conserve water more effectively? And that's starting up in the strategic water source areas and saying, can we clear invasive alien trees to release more water? It's looking at our built infrastructure and saying, how do we reduce the amount of leakage, and how do we make sure that we are treating water with the requisite respect that it deserves? So I would say that efficiency is part of conservation. I think that these sorts of initiatives are important from a public awareness perspective, because when you go out there and you're walking through a river or walking along your beach and you've got gloves on and you're picking up rubbish and you're filling a bag, it's a very visceral way of understanding what the problem is. And if we can get more people involved in that, I think that it'll be very effective at starting to embed in their minds just how serious this issue is. And I see these initiatives happening across the country along, particularly along rivers, people going and cleaning up rivers. And I think that from a public awareness perspective, they're very, very important, and I would really encourage it. You know, in terms of the impact that they have, of course, if these things are not ongoing, if it's just a one-off, it's going to have some impact, but it's not going to be lasting. And the reason for that is that it's not a systemic change. You know, the next time there's a big rainfall event, all the rubbish is going to get washed down again and get caught on the rivers or washed up on the beaches. And so it can feel futile if you are cleaning up and then things are just getting dirty again. So I think that it's important, but it's not sufficient to solve the problem. What we need to do is look at a systemic change. And that means, how do we change the way that people interact with plastic and rubbish? How do we change the systems so that they're more circular? So that, you know, we start to see these things more as resources than as waste. So that and that we create the systems to capture those resources and feed them back into the system so that they can get reused and recycled, and less of that rubbish is then going to end up in our rivers and our dams. We also need to look at our municipal systems, our waste disposal systems, because those are also failing many of our communities in this country, where people don't have a choice but to dump their rubbish into a river or somewhere away because the municipalities are not collecting their rubbish. So it has to be a systemic approach. But I would absolutely encourage people to continue to participate in the cleanups.
Choose nature. Choose turtles. Choose tomorrow. Choose to make a difference. Choose eco-friendly paper straws. Choose Series.
I think that the public, there's definitely a need for more public awareness. I think that the people that are interested will know about these things, but that's not the problem. It's trying to get the people that maybe aren't aware and aren't interested to be more aware, right? And it's not just about rubbish and about the rivers, but it's about water as a whole. And it's about saying, you know, I don't think that people in this country recognize just what a precarious situation we're in from a water perspective. Both from the degradation of the strategic water source areas to our infrastructure starting to degrade and lack of resources to sort of maintain and build new infrastructure, to the resources themselves, realizing that we don't have endless water resources that we can just waste and pollute as we want. You know, we are just about at the edge of our water resources as it is, and we've got a growing economy to supply. We've got a growing population. We have people that still don't have access to basic water supply. You know, these are all problems that will require more water resources. And that means that, and it's not like we can just go start building more dams and drawing in more water resources into the system. It can't happen. We just don't have that much water. So we're going to have to think very differently about how we use water. We're going to have to be more responsible with the way that we use water. And it's going to have to come from everyone. Everyone is going to have to come to the party, from the people in their houses, to the businesses, to the farmers, to the municipalities and government. Everyone is going to have to come to the party. And I think that we need a lot more awareness of the fact that we're in this together, and we all need to pull our weight when it comes to water. The project that has had the deepest impact on me is a project that I run in the Eastern Cape, Drakensberg. It's a very rural area, very remote. It's a communal landscape, and when you go out there, people live very close to the ground, to their natural resources. So there's not a lot of sort of formal economic activity happening there. People still live in a very traditional way, relying on agriculture and livestock farming for their livelihoods. And it's this incredible, beautiful landscape. But you see that because of the close relationship between the communities and the natural environment, you've seen that as the natural environment starts to erode, people's livelihoods start to erode too. So there's invasive alien trees that are coming and replacing the natural grasslands with these forests, sucking up water, which means that there's less water in the rivers. The natural springs that people rely on for their water supply, they stop running, so it's affecting people's ability to get water. And it means that there's less space and less grass for the cattle to feed on, so there's so the cattle get skinnier and they don't breed as well, so it starts to affect their livelihoods there. But then you also see that the management systems around managing cattle have also started to degrade, partially because of the migrant labor system. People leaving these areas when they're quite young, going to the cities, and then only returning when they're older to come back and be farmers in their old age, and they don't necessarily have those knowledge systems of how to manage their grasslands effectively and sustainably. And that's causing overgrazing, which means that there's no grass to keep the soil in place, and then when the rains come, it washes away the soil, and that ends up in the rivers, which reduces the water quality in the rivers. And when the soils wash away, then the quality of the grass reduces, which means a further impact on the lives of the people living in these areas. And so you just saw that their livelihoods and the environment were degrading, and they were also having an interaction, because when there's less space available, then people put more cattle on less grass, which has more of an impact on the grass. So it was just a degenerative cycle. And we work with this amazing organization called Environmental and Rural Solutions up in this area, run by these two incredibly passionate women named Sisi Matela and Nikki McLeod. And they just have this incredible passion for the community and the landscape. And by working very, very closely with the local traditional leaders and with the local communities, they found them and the partnerships that they've helped to create have started to unearth these new ways of doing things and these new opportunities. And so they strengthen the governance systems, they provide training, they provide infrastructure, they provide support to help people to help themselves. So they're not saying we're going to come in and do everything. They're saying, here we go, we're going to help you guys to manage your resources better and create better livelihoods out of these things. And one of the things that has really unlocked the whole system into a more sustainable system is they found that even though it's primarily a cattle economy, people didn't have a readily available market to sell their cattle. If they wanted to sell their cattle, they had to walk for 3 days to get to the nearest town, or they had to sell it to their neighbor, and there was like the quality of their cattle didn't equate to more money in their pocket when they wanted to sell it. So them and several other organizations like Conservation South Africa brought in a small business called Meat Naturally, and this is a mobile cattle auction that takes the market to the people in these very, very rural areas and allows them to come there and sell their cattle. And the trick is that when people come and they're part of a grazing association that is implementing these sustainable practices, they get a lower commission at the auction than they would if they're just some guy that's bringing his cattle to sell. So that equates to, for every cattle, they get an extra few $100 for their cattle. And suddenly that's a real incentive to say, I want to be part of this grazing association. I want to implement these sustainable practices. I want to have access to these markets, so I'm going to do things the right way. And we've seen that what's been so powerful is not just the impact that you see on the land, but the impact that you see in people's minds. Because you see that people are taking responsibility, you see that people understand the issues now and are operating in a different way because they know that their actions matter and that their actions can have a beneficial impact on their communities and on their livelihoods. And that's been my most gratifying experience, yeah. So from a water perspective, as I said, we need to create awareness, and we need people to understand where their water comes from and how water is used and how to better use their water. So I would encourage people to go onto journeyofwater.co.za. It's a campaign that we run usually every 2 years, where we take people on a journey down a river catchment, and we show people where their water comes from, how it's used, how it's abused, and how it gets to their taps. And we take celebrities with us, we take media. It's a beautiful journey, and it's a lot of fun. And you can go onto this website, you can see where your water comes from. You can also get tips and tricks on how to save water yourself. So from a water perspective, I would say that that's a really, really cool one to start to engage with. But we have such a vast array of work, and there are so many things that people could participate in or read up on or use our resources. If you want to know about plastics, we have reports about plastics that you can learn about, called the Facts and Futures reports. So I would encourage people to go on our website, to look up those facts and futures, and you can find them for a range of different things. And that's like a one-stop shop where you can learn about any particular issue that you want. Another thing, which is a very practical and a very cool thing to get involved in, is the SASSI list, South African Sustainable Seafood Initiative. And that means, we have issues with overfishing in this country, and people fishing fish that should not be caught and should not be eaten in restaurants because their populations are just not stable enough to do that. So this is there's an app, there are booklets. It's a very simple tool that allows you to make better decisions. So you're in a restaurant, you see that there's kabeljo on the menu. You can look at your list and it says red, do not eat. This is an endangered species, or this is an unsustainable fish stock. Do not eat, and you can start to make better decisions like that. So that's just one example of a really cool, practical tool that will help you be more sustainable.
Okay. Thank you very much, Samir, for your show. Next week on Conservation Starter.
I always like to say it's important to do one good green deed a day, because doing these small little things, they eventually add up.
Tune in and stand a chance to win some awesome prizes. Join the conversation on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Hashtag Series Paper Straw Challenge and hashtag Keep ZA Clean. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at iloveza.com, and log on to our website www.iloveza.com.